Okay, thanks, Kimberly. So we have Keith speaking here. So Keith has worked at WSN for the past 4 years as an industrial hygienist and ventilation specialist. He has over 20 years of experience working in various mining operations located in Northern Ontario and in the Sudbury Basin. Prior to joining WSN, Keith held roles in engineering, operations, and health and safety. Keith holds a degree in applied science engineering with honors from Queen's University and is a professional engineer licensed in the province of Ontario. He's currently working on obtaining a Canadian Registered Safety Professional designation, which is a CRSP designation. So Keith, I'll hand it off to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Andre. Thank you for your presentation. So now that we've assessed heat stress or potential for heat strain, now we're going to talk about heat stress controls. How can we actually control it or prevent it? Any other health hazard or safety hazard, you want to follow the hierarchy of controls. Of course, if you can eliminate it, that's great, but it's not always practical to stop work or you can't get rid of the heat all the time if you're working in a foundry or you're working very deep underground. So you have to go to the best thing. So engineering controls are probably your better controls when it comes to heat stress. And then administrative controls are you're going to use a lot of those like acclimatization programs, work rest regimes, and then personal protective equipment. So engineering controls. So let's try to reduce heat at the source or eliminate if possible. So controlling heat at the source. So if you have radiant heat, you might try to insulate. You got exhaust, hot air or steam, radiant shielding. Those are all things that you can try to do to control some radiant heat. Ventilation, try to increase the airflow. That'll help with the evaporation of the sweat, which allows you to cool your body. And then look at air conditioning if possible, especially if you're working in some environments. You have no choice but to try to implement some cooling strategies. Otherwise, you will hit heat stress at a very quick pace. Air conditioned rest areas and cooling booths for breaks. And I know at some of the underground mines, they do have air conditioning in some of the deep mines, or they have air conditioned refuge stations at least. And it's certainly a place you want to go and take breaks when you're working in very hot conditions. If the air temperature is not too warm, then fans will help with evaporative cooling. You may use body misters and use less labor-intensive tools. So if you could do mechanization or mechanical aids, those are all things that might lower your metabolic load. Administrative controls, those are very important, but like with anything else, administrative controls, there's a high reliance on human beings to follow them. And it's hard to say to people, well, let's just stop work. Let's just do this work rest regime. Let's just take a break. You have somebody working 7,000 feet underground. They're in a raise. They're making production bonus. And then we're going to tell them we're going to stop to work. It is a very effective work rest regimes, but it's not always the most practical thing. So I just want people to be aware of that as well. And I know from my own experience, it was hard to get people to stop to work. So that's why we got to look at other things out there in order to manage the heat. So if you can control internal heat generation, maybe reduce the workload, the pace and duration, especially when you're new or returning. Gradually increase people, make sure they get acclimatized. Start for new workers, you might start at 20% on day one and gradually increase 20% each day. Um, Assign extra workers, and a lot of times people will just schedule strenuous jobs to cooler times of the day. So even myself, I know when I'm doing heavy yard work, I'll actually do that early in the morning before it gets too hot. Or even when I like to go out mountain biking, I won't pick it at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm going to actually do it at first thing in the morning when it's cooler. And good nutrition and rest is actually where you can, get a lot of the sodium, potassium. You don't always have to go to Gatorade or other things to supplement sodium. And then probably the biggest administrative control is ensuring proper acclimatization of workers. So Andre touched on that a bit earlier, and making sure. And the unfortunate thing with acclimatization is after 3, 4 days that you're away from it, you lose it. And after 3 weeks, you pretty much lose all of it. So it's like starting over again if you go away on a long holiday. The other thing too, I think is important with heat stress and strain is actually training people. A lot of people don't really understand the signs and symptoms, And I find in the mining industry, especially, like we work in some pretty hot environments, and people don't always recognize they get kind of cramps or they get rashes and they just shrug it off as being something else. So I think it's important to train people about the signs and symptoms of heat stress, making sure that there's a lot of accessible drinking water. So encourage workers to drink cool water every 15, 20 minutes, even if they're not thirsty. And I would really encourage pre-hydration. So I know for myself, even when I was working, when I'd work underground, if it was a very hot area, I would actually make sure that I drank a lot of water ahead of time, even if I wasn't thirsty. Make sure you self-monitor, and usually a lot of times we have a buddy system. So a lot of times other people will recognize the signs and symptoms in yourself. Develop a hot weather plan. So you can use the Humidex or you can use ACGIH or some other method. And then if we get into personal protective equipment or clothing, it's kind of a double-edged sword. So sometimes the clothing can actually help with the radiant heat, block it out. It actually can provide some cooling effects depending on what kind of clothing you're wearing. But at the same time, if it's impermeable, it'll actually block the sweat in and you won't be able to cool yourself off. So you have to be careful with clothing. But there is a lot of benefits to wearing the right type of clothing. So if appropriate, light summer or breathable clothing should be worn. In case of high radiant heat, in some cases you might have to wear reflective clothing if you're in a refinery. There's cooling vests out there and water-cooled garments. You see some pictures on the bottom two, left. And for very hot environments, air, water, or ice-cool insulated clothing should be considered. So some of this isn't going to always be practical. You see the one picture on the left-hand side. You actually hook that up to an air compressor. It does work really well, but that may not be very practical to have a hose attached to you to the back. So as I mentioned, just previously, protective clothing can inhibit the sweat evaporation due to lack of permeation, and that can increase your body temperature quite quickly. So you have to be very careful with that. And you saw from Andre's slide, you actually add plus 11 to the WBGT when you have vapor barrier clothing. Some of that clothing will be so hot and you'll be so sweaty inside and you can't cool yourself off and you can be overcome by heat stress very quickly. So make sure you do take all of that into account when you're performing your heat stress evaluation. Make sure you look at all the clothing factors, including as well as the metabolic piece to it as well. And during breaks, if you can remove protective clothing, improve the sweat evaporation and reduce your body temperature. And then always make sure you have passive or active cooling during rests and replenish fluids in the body. So just some control guidance. So we talked quite a bit about acclimatization, so I'll glance over, but it is a very important administrative control. Make sure that people get properly acclimatized and make sure that you have a plan as well about increasing their workload. Use a buddy system, and we did talk, we're still in COVID, unfortunately. So in some places we still need to wear face coverings. So make sure that you guard against that. I know personally myself, when I have to train using a face covering, that I actually get very sweaty, very hot, very uncomfortable. So just you might need more breaks when you're using face coverings. Ventilation, probably one of your most important things, and air conditioning more so if it's very humid outside. You want to decrease humidity. And I think this is really important, medical screening and monitoring. So out of all physical hazards, there's a high physiological dependence, depending on your body weight, medical conditions, medication you're on, people that are overweight, they're not very physically fit. All of those things are important to actually monitor. And I know that people that do succumb to heat stress or they have it, it takes a long time to get over it once you get it. You're very nauseated. It could be 2, 3 days where you feel very sick, very weak. And then once you do get that, you actually have a higher predisposition to getting it again. So make sure, I think medical screening and monitoring should be part of your program. Never ignore the signs and symptoms, no matter what the temperature or humidex. Just make sure that you watch others and self-monitor yourself as well in the early stages. If you do that, it could decrease the chances of obtaining heat stress. 911 if required. That may be more so if you're getting up there and sort of heat exhaustion, especially with heat stroke. But while waiting to do this, move worker to a cool shaded place, loosen or remove heavy clothing, provide cool water, sports drink to worker, fan and mist worker with water. But make sure that you do call for help, especially if they're getting on to the latter stages of heat illness. Proposed mining legislation coming up. So there's amendments being proposed to Regulation 854 pertaining to managing heat. So what it says specifically, and this is on the public, I showed the link here down below, so to add a new provision requiring that mine or mining plants in consultation with the Joint Health and Safety Committee or safety representative, if any, develop and maintain procedure for managing the heat temperature in the workplace to protect the health and safety of workers. So I don't know what that's going to look like. I don't know what's currently with the Mining Legislative Review Committee, but I'm not sure how inspectors will view this or what they exactly would be looking for when we're trying to meet legislative compliance around this. So I believe a lot of this discussion that we're having today and stuff that we're going to have with Sandra, as well as what Andre talked about, will be important. There'll be a lot of people probably looking for help on how to meet legislative compliance around this and maybe some guidelines. So that's coming out, and it's timely. We look at global warming right now. We look at the fact that we're starting to see a lot more illness, heat illness, and fatalities associated with high heat. And I think in mines, it's always been underreported, and we work in some very hot conditions. Implement a heat stress management policy program overall. Once you do get, a set that includes stuff around risk assessment, what kind of exposure guidelines you're going to use, what are the controls you're going to have, what kind of medical screening and surveillance, first aid and procedures for getting medical attention, liquid replacement, acclimatization program, scheduling of work and work rest schedules, and the roles and responsibilities and training. That should be probably part of an all-inclusive heat stress management policy program. Summary. So prevention is the best form of treatment. Learn the signs and symptoms of heat-related illness. Monitor yourself and your coworkers. Block out direct sun or other heat sources if possible. Use cooling fans, air conditioning, and rest regularly. Drink lots of water. Wear lightweight, light-colored clothing if possible. Avoid the alcohol and caffeinated drinks. And if you can, implement a heat stress prevention program. And that's the end of the control piece. So now I will get ready to pass this on to Sandra. Thank you.
I have a couple quick questions. There's one here. What do you think of urine test strips to see how well hydrated you are? Be that kind of monitoring real time.
Asking me?
Yes, asking Sandra.
Hydration is really important. Don't get me wrong. Hydration is really important. And I loved when you talked through about the importance of having the water the night before, 500 mils before you go to work, drinking throughout working and getting home and drinking more. That's important because it's so protective. When your core temperature is starting to go up, I think you said this, the blood has to go to the skin to get rid of the heat, which will force it to compromise other areas. And of course, the brain being one of them and your other organs being one of them. And lack of hydration will make all of that so much worse. It will make you at risk for fainting, right? And particularly if you bent over or you stood up quickly, right? That kind of, and I mean, you can say that fainting's not dangerous, but it kind of is. I've not seen people. I've heard of people who have been in the shaft and fainted and broke their leg or broke an ankle, right? Like when you hit the ground, it's not good. And so being hydrated helps prevent that kind of issue and also will help prevent sort of the more subtle effects of heat strain and muscle cramping, which and certainly will protect you if you unfortunately went into full exhaustion and heat stroke. You're in a better position if you're better hydrated. So hydration, totally important. Urine strips, looking at your urine color, counting how many times you pee a day. It's one way of knowing what's normal for you, but it's not it's not the gold standard, right? It's not gonna protect you at the end. If you're drinking your water, then you're doing what you should do. and I'm an academic, sorry.
Sorry,
That's not,
Sandra, we do
that's
have
not pop.
yeah.
More? Okay, I'll stop.
No, we just do have a few other things, and we still wanted to go through the survey that Keith wanted to present. So,
Oh yeah.
Kimberly, you have your hand up.
Just a quick question, because I can't stay to the end. And I can't thank Andre enough for putting this together with our partners. I'll let you do the closeout. I do have a quick question for all of you. And Keith, you pop on, you're on the panel here, and I can't wait for you to tell us about the Ottawa U research. But I wanted to ask you all what we've been finding too, because this, there have been a lot of great comments from the attendees. And, one of the things about wearables is, how do we get through the barrier of, and I guess it's there's a total worker health NIOSH model. There's support for this. You can't treat every body like the same body, which, it's great that we have the guidelines and they have their limitations. And Sandra introduced so many cool ways of looking at an individual, and then, responding. But how do you think we can achieve breaking down the barriers around, people thinking their data is personal medical information, and redacting and responding? And there's been a number of I don't know if it's supported so much by workers sharing what they might think is personal medical, or and I think there's a way forward. I just wanted to throw it out there for discussion to the panel. And I may not even get to stay for the response. I'll try, but it's an interesting new world that we're living in with this technology. And I just wanted to comment, even from the crowd, on personal data, and from the panel. Yeah.
Sandra, you could probably respond to this better than the rest of us.
I could try. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but I really think that's where it's got to start, right? I think that the government needs to set laws around the regulation of this data. And it needs to be done in a way that people can trust it and believe it. And that is going to be the biggest hurdle, because as soon as one person or one organization misuses the data, it's going to be a problem. So I do think there's lots of ways you can put blocks in place so that you can prevent the misuse. And one of those, honestly, is having an independent, so when I talk about this with Mine Rescue, for example, Ontario Mine Rescue could be the independent body that gets the data. Vale doesn't get it. Or Glencore, yeah. Or I'm not picking, those are the companies that come to my head, right?
Yeah.
If you had a group that you trusted, they could be in charge of the data, and they would prevent anybody knowing what your individual data says. That's probably the easiest way to go forward that would make people most comfortable. But I really want to say, this stuff is dangerous. We do want to get on board at some level of supporting it and moving those issues forwards, because it's going to save lives. I mean, we're having construction work done at night now, yeah. And that's a risk. And farmers, this is so huge.
Thank you. Yeah. Maybe it's OCal. Maybe we can be the neutral party. Yeah.
Yeah.
Holder of the data. There you go. Yeah.
Okay, we want to hear from Keith here with the survey. So Keith, you have.
Yeah, I'm gonna give you
over, but 3 minutes is kind of what we got.
No, I'm gonna give you even less than that. So I know everybody's at the end here. Great presentation, Sandra. Great presentation, Andre. It was great working with you on this. So actually, I'm just gonna point out to the chat box that Vinny Sharma gives a great 30-second elevator speech about what this is. So that's why I'll make it very quick. So it's about identifying key factors contributing to excessive heat stress and strain in the mining industry so that we can effectively design practical mitigation strategies. And that's what really this survey that's being done and being organized and directed by Dr. Glenn Kenny Director of Human and Environmental Physiology Research Unit at the University of Ottawa, and Emily Tetzlaff, PhD candidate. So we're looking at a Canada-wide scan to evaluate heat stress in the mining industry. As we noted earlier, this is very timely. It's timely because the mining regulations are looking into implementing something around managing heat. And just for everybody else's interest, the USA is actually looking at implementing federal regulations around heat stress. So it's time we take it serious. It goes underreported in mines. So just a really quick snapshot of this. Let me just move my slides ahead. So the good thing about this is wordy. I'm not going to go through all this. You're going to have these 8 slides that I was provided by Dr. Kenny when we post this to the OCAL webpage. This will give you all the additional context required. Essentially, we know that heat's a problem in mining, lots of overexertion, lots of dehydration, high temperatures, humidity. We want to get a study that develops effective heat stress, heat strain identification, and management strategies to protect miners against harmful effects of prolonged heat exposure. That's the aim of the study. We got 2 types of people that could participate. We have frontline workers and then occupational health and safety personnel and managers. So I'll leave it at that. You've got the links in here for the frontline workers and health and safety personnel. You have then in the frontline worker questionnaire, these give you the various elements that we're looking at answering in that survey. And then on the OHS personnel, managers, and people who work in health safety, these are the other parameters: background, of course, demographics, heat stress response. Kind of want to understand how you currently view heat stress so that eventually maybe some better guidelines can be provided. So I can't go in much more into this. I'll finish off with this because I know everybody wants to get going. So what is the questionnaire results? Will help identify the level of physiological strain, increase awareness about the risks associated with exposure to heat, help companies in revising management strategies, and health and safety can use the data acquired from the worker survey to assess the effectiveness of current heat stress management programs. So with that, hopefully, Andre, I met the time limit. If you need more information, these are the 2 people that you can contact, Dr. Glenn Kenny and Emily. And again, these slides, the detail will be provided in the presentation attached on the OCAL website if you want more detail. And of course, thank you to everybody for attending today and for the questions. That's it, Andre.
Thanks, Keith. So yeah, thanks everyone for attending. I really want to thank you, Keith and Sandra, for participating and being part of this webinar. I really appreciate it. You guys had a really good talk, and Sandra, it's always interesting to see how how the research is coming and where to move forward with everything. Kind of applying what we know to to heat stress. So it's great. It really felt like I was back in an exercise physiology course, and it was great. But really enjoy the presentations. So yeah, thanks again for everyone. If you do have questions, we are out of time. Just you could send me an email and I could put it out to the group, or you can send them an email directly either to Keith or Sandra. So again, thanks everyone, and have a good day.